This is Dr. Kiran from Shield Healthcare Medical Affairs, and I would first like to welcome all the audience and the doctors for taking time out from their very stressful, which is situation, which is even made more stressful by these pandemic times. So I would also like to have the pleasure to invite Girija ma'am. Ma'am is well known and needs no introduction. However, I will say a few words about ma'am. Ma'am has completed her MD and FSCOG, FSCS. Ma'am has a diploma in gynecological endoscopy. Ma'am is a professor of OBGYN in the prestigious Bharati Vidyapeeth University Medical College. Ma'am is a consultant, Cloud9 Apollo Clinic, Hospitals, Pune. Ma'am is also the director of Girija Hospital and Fertility Center in Kothur, Pune. Ma'am has got many awards, but I will just name a few. Ma'am received the Trupta Umranikar Award for the first, for standing first in MD in 1992 from the Pune University. Ma'am has also received the Anandibai Joshi Award for Excellence in Medical Service. Specialization of ma'am is in many areas, but specifically towards maternal fetal medicine and gynecological endoscopy. Ma'am was a member of the steering committee of World Organization of Justosis. Ma'am was the assistant coordinator National Eclampsia Registry. Ma'am was the chairperson Medical Disorders in Pregnancy Committee FOXI between the years 2013 to 16. Ma'am was also the joint secretary FOXI in 2010. Ma'am was the vice president India chapter Justosis. Ma'am is a national mentor for Lakshya GOI. So with this, I would like to hand over the screen to ma'am for her very, very important presentation on vaginal microbiome and infertility. Over to you, ma'am.
At the outset, I would like to thank the Shield Pharma for giving us this stage. And I want to thank the Food, Drugs and Medical Surgical Equipment Committee of FOXI, and especially Dr. Vidya Thobi and Dr. Radhesh Gandhi, and Madam Ramani Devi, the Vice President, for giving me this opportunity of being with you all this afternoon to speak on a very important topic on vaginal microbiomes and infertility. Actually, my interest into this particular arena came up with this publication because I used to have many patients coming with infertility. And every time when we ask about sexual history, I feel we must also ask about the actual coital history. Many of them would come with complaints of burning, itching, and many of them would be somewhere in the periovulatory phase. And somehow, somewhere in the patients of infertility or otherwise, we would miss this. The same would happen in patients who become pregnant, and we are seeing there's a huge lot of PROMs occurring in our practices. And therefore, I went into investigations as to find out. And this was a very interesting publication that I came across where it spoke about evidence that the endometrial microbiota has an effect on implantation success or failure. And many of that before I had read about preterm delivery, particularly in this particular study, they studied about the lactobacilli inside the endometrial cavity in the vagina, and they found that the ones which were lactobacillus dominated in the endometrium were associated with better implantation rates, while not associated ones were having problems with implantation. And the study concluded that there is a novel microbiological dimension to the reproductive process, and therefore we have to go into reverse kind of an analysis as to what is happening there. Additionally, there has been this publication in the Elsevier as to what fertility specialists should know about the vaginal microbiome, and it was a review and a lot of terminologies like the microbiota, the microbiome came up. And if when you talk of the microbiome, we all know that vagina is a completely a different habitat, and which has an a good balance of a biotic and an abiotic factors, and these are not only responsible for protecting the woman against ascending infections, they do get changed, influenced during her menstrual cycle, during the hormones that we're using, in consequence to sexuality, and all these issues required to be looked into. The commonest one, therefore, which we understand, and much has been like whenever we used to teach our students, we always spoke about candidal vaginitis, trichomonal vaginitis, and the typical classifications. But there's a huge lot of things which are now being identified, and the incidence of this being very high is the bacterial vaginosis, which being commonest, and usually it is a persistent imbalance of the microbiota in the vagina as a result of improper or incomplete treatment. And this is defined as an abnormal microflora of the vagina characterized by an overgrowth of anaerobic bacteria, especially the Gardnerella vaginalis, with a marked decrease in the presence of lactobacillus. And when we put in a speculum, or even if we just do a label examination of the patient, we are able to identify bacterial vaginosis. Sometimes it may get categorized or understood to be a normal vaginal secretion. But one has to remember that the normal vaginal secretion is never like this, homogeneous, white, and opaque. And therefore, this has to be identified, because either you will have a watery discharge or you will have a sticky, mucoid, non-foul smelling discharge coming out of the cervix. You will never have a homogeneous white discharge. And this is typical bacterial vaginosis. Vulvovaginal candidiasis usually will be presenting with symptoms, and many times women with bacterial vaginosis will have no symptoms. They would just say that there's some sort of a burning, especially initiated due to a sexual contact, or maybe it is not dependent on the menstrual cycle, and there can be even trichomonial infections which are sexually transmitted. Typically, the patient would say that they occur post-menstrually. Pre-menstrually would be candidiasis, post-menstrually would be typically trichomoniasis, and BV will be something which may be asymptomatic many times, and you will have to make a diagnosis. The WHO estimates that there are 333 million new cases of curable vulvovaginal infections per year, and BV happens to have the 40 to 45% of the contribution, and I think that's something that we all have to be extremely aware of. Yet 7 to 72% of women with vaginitis may remain undiagnosed, and that could explain a lot of things. Most of us, and you must have also have this experiences, that you just tell them about vaginal hygiene, you just correct their vaginitis, and many a times women find it much easy to have cohabitation and conceive. Now, if you look at the various changes that occur during the lifetime of the woman, before there can be STD, PID, cervicitis. Around fertilization, it can give rise to pro-inflammatory cytokines, sperm motility and viability may get infected. During pregnancy, there can be amniotic fluid infection, chorioamnionitis, late miscarriages, PROMs, preterm deliveries, and sometimes even viral reactivations because there is alteration in the immunity. And afterwards, there can be even neonatal infections which can be attributed to the vaginitis. Now, abnormal vaginal bacterial flora are identified to have adverse obstetric and gynecological sequelae like PID, then even cervical intraepithelial neoplasias, cuff infections, and even obstetric sequelae like the PROMs, the spontaneous preterm labors, preterm births, and postpartum endometritis. And what are the risk factors? Change maybe in the sexual partners, age at the first exposure, it matters if it's very early or even late, cigarette smoking or tobacco abuse, concurrent STDs, IUCDs also have attributed. Sometimes women have personal vaginal practices of vaginal douching which can be responsible. There can be even Asian women apparently have been having a higher incidence of this particular infection. Now, we've been talking about menstrual hygiene a lot in our country. And then we are also talking about, patchy, sometimes the government, so many NGOs come up with this kind of activities of talking about sanitary napkins. And the idea came up because of the sterility issues and the hygiene that is been identified. And it's actually extremely apathetic.
Ma'am, this is Dr. Kiran, ma'am. You're not audible, ma'am. Hello?
How come?
Now it's clear, ma'am. Now it's clear.
Yeah. And we also have Dr. Neelam Singh. She functionary at the Vatsalya saying medically too poor menstrual hygiene led to infections, inflammations, menstrual cramps, and vaginal discharges, pushing the girls into the trap of quacks and fake healers, which further aggravated the conditions. So I think as gynecologists, it's extremely important that these are our part of our checklisting when we are dealing with patients. What kind of perineal hygiene do they have? What is their menstrual hygiene practices? How are they using their underwear? and what are their sexual hygiene practices. I think these are very important and the core of a gynecological practice, because if you look at the Indian scenario, Indian women's attitude towards hygiene and cleanliness has changed over the years, no doubt. There is an importance of menstrual hygiene management. There is, however, a lack of awareness, neglect, and transparency pertaining to the feminine hygiene. And many Indian women cannot even afford the basic sanitation exercises also. Be it pan-India, it's not about only the rural or the ignorant women that we're talking of. Even women who are working in the corporate cultures, in the urban population of this country, have challenges. And therefore, you find that the prevalence of India of vulvovaginal infections is to the tune of 30%, and most common documented causes of symptomatic vaginal discharge are bacterial vaginosis. And this is something that we all need to be aware of. And you can see here the incidents depicted. Now, this was a study which was conducted in the South Indian part of our country, and it was found that women clinically diagnosed with bacterial vaginosis had a higher prevalence of vulvovaginal candidiasis also. And 35% of 650 adult women living in rural Maharashtra state and Prasad et al. Diagnosed vulvovaginal candidiasis in 10% of 451 married 16 to 22-year-old women in rural Tamil Nadu state also. So you have to look at this particular thing. Many times women may not come up with it. Many times they may be complacent and they may go into acceptance. Because I'm sexually active, this is going to happen, and therefore they wouldn't want to seek help. And it's important that we educate and we look for these infections. And you can see the age-wise distribution depending on the education and the years with a sexual partner and how they influence, and especially the socioeconomic status and the parity. And you can see that the majority prevalence seen in the age group of 16 to 20, which lacks knowledge about vaginal hygiene and care. Now, this is one more interesting publication from Punjab, which talks of various causes of vaginal discharge among sexually active females in the age of 20 to 40 years of age. And it is found that 37% were based on symptoms. Just imagine the rest of them may be asymptomatic. 37% by laboratory diagnosis were diagnosed and confirmed, and 45% had bacterial vaginosis. And you can just keep on seeing that there is a much higher incidence, and usually it seems to be profound in women who have associated diabetes. And we cannot ignore our mothers who are seeking fertility treatment with obesity, PCOD, pre-diabetic states, where this kind of alteration in the bacterial flora can be extremely rampant. Any use of hormones, it's written here oral contraceptives, but even when we are giving the progesterone hormones or whichever hormone therapies that we give our women that can alter the vaginal pH, making them susceptible to these infections. Intrauterine devices, oral antibiotics, many a times antibiotics, unfortunately, are consumed by women as OTC medicines. UTI ho gaya, jaake antibiotic khao, tooth infection, anything. And typically, if you ask them history, they would tell you that yes, they've been consuming antibiotics, and that can also alter the imbalance of the vaginal flora and topple it towards an imbalance. Now, diabetes and intimate health in India is one thing which I want to draw your attention to, because if you find one of the biggest challenges in fertility management is diabetes or a pre-diabetic condition, and India has it all. There's a drastic change in the lifestyle of women, making them obese, and it leads to further complications in vaginal infection. And this is the common reason for gestational diabetes, we know, and every fifth woman in the country is suffering from it, and it further compromises their intimate health. And please do not get carried away by the fact that we are a very typical kind of an orthodox community. No, you can see in this publication, it was found that 52% of women had consummated their marriage before the age of 18. So please remember that it's many a times women may not tell you this, but they are already sexually exposed. Now, if you look at the various timelines in the lifetime, the pH of the vagina, of the woman's vaginal area during the different phases of their lives keeps on changing. And especially in the childbearing age group, it has to be in the optimum of 4 to 5. While peripubertal, it will be 5 to 7. You can have many young girls coming to you with vaginitis. And first and foremost thing that should come to your mind is, okay, is she sexually exposed? And we have to find that out. Pregnancy, we all know, and childbearing age group, especially if it is presenting, and especially you have a fertility patient with you, you require to look into it. Now, we all know that the age affects the anatomy and the physiology, where the vaginal mucosa is columnar epithelium, no mucous glands, and normal vaginal flora in an adolescent child with gram-positive cocci and anaerobic gram-negative. the labia are thin with a thin hymen. While in a young reproductive age woman, there is an acidic vaginal pH, stratified squamous vaginal mucosa and glands, normal vaginal flora dominated by lactobacilli, thick labia and hypertrophied hymens and vaginal walls, because now she has an optimum estrogen in her body. While as the woman becomes perimenopausal or postmenopausal, she has chronic vaginitis, atrophic vaginitis, and there is hypoestrogenism. Now, if we look at the various causes during the menstrual cycle, we find that there are changes in the microbial flora in the follicular phase where there is estrogen dominance, and estrogen is known to favor candida. Endocrinological change of pregnancy favor the growth of other bacteria which overwhelm the normal flora. So because of a hyperacidic condition during pregnancy, the normal commensals are actually subdued, and then the opportunistic infections become predominant. Now, many times sexually transmitted diseases can be a reason, and typically a woman would relate to it to a sexual contact. Many times we find ourselves talking to them, okay, fine, it's okay. Maybe you're having sex very less frequently, that's why you're having, but it's always a good practice to put in a speculum and look at them. And you would typically find an angry vagina, which would actually be a cause, or which could actually be having a bacterial vaginosis. And therefore, we should look at them carefully. Now, sexual activity has been linked to development of bacterial vaginosis because incidence of BV increases with an increase in the number of recent and lifetime sexual partners, and a new sexual partner can be related to BV, and male partners of women with BV may have urethral colonization by the same organism, but the male is asymptomatic, and therefore it's always a good practice to even treat the man. Whenever we are doing the semen analysis, or whenever we are talking of, perimenstrual antimicrobials, which we plan to give to our women considering candidal and such infections, it's always a good practice to even give the man a treatment for prevention of sexually transmitted infections. Now, if you look at the dynamic ecosystem of vagina, it is basically predominant by the lactobacillus, the friendly lactobacilli, and which are thriving on glycogen, because this glycogen converts to lactic acid, giving rise to the pH of 4.5. And this is a hostile environment for anaerobes, Gardnerella vaginalis, and lactacin B, acidoline, and hydrogen peroxidase releasing species, and certain species protect against bacterial vaginosis. This ecosystem is extremely pivotal in maintaining the health of the vagina, and therefore also maintaining the issues around cohabitation and intimacy. Now, mucinase and silidase are known to be increased in the vaginal fluid, and they cause breakdown of mucosal barrier, and that's how they cause the entry of pathogen. And there is then the reduction of lactobacilli, reduction of the hydrogen peroxide protection, overgrowth of bacterial vaginal associated bacteria, and raised pH, and this can be a huge deterrent in fertility issues. 7 viruses have been detected to inhabit lactobacilli and gradually kill them, and they cause reduction in the acid production, and there is overgrowth of anaerobes. And there are certain confusing factors because normal flora acts as pathogens here, like gram-negative anaerobic bacteria, bacteroids, Revotella, Porphyromonas, yeast, Mycoplasma, Staph, E. coli, and Klebsiella are commonly seen. Many times we are doing high vaginal swabs in most of our patients who present with prom or recurrent vaginitis. And the commonest microbial that we find there is either an E. coli or a Klebsiella. And many a times we feel that probably it is a contaminant which is coming from the GI tract. Now, there is a dramatic rise in the anaerobes and other organisms, and there is a dramatic reduction in the lactobacilli. That is exactly what is the pathogenesis of bacterial vaginosis. And that's why it is called as vaginosis and not vaginitis. Kind of a situation, as I mentioned just now, with a proper pH, this is a wonderful non-inflammatory environment. While if it topples, you can see that this environment becomes what is called as a pro-inflammatory environment, which is typically called as dysbiosis, which is very commonly associated with bacterial vaginosis. Now, the diagnosis is, as I mentioned, 50% of the times it's asymptomatic. There can be malodorous vaginal discharge, no pruritus, and there is a whitish gray, thin, homogeneous adherent to the wall. Even if you don't pass the speculum, even if you just retract the vulva, you will be able to diagnose this condition. And then there are Ansel's criteria, which have been spoken about. And this is the homogeneous secretion as seen here on the screen. A fishy ammoniacal odor, which is emanated when you place the secretions on the slide and drop 5 to 10% of KOH on that, and it can emanate that odor. This can be a OPD bedside test. If you do a pH study by putting a litmus paper, if the pH is found to be more than 4.5, it is bacterial vaginosis. And if you do a histopathological examination or a staining, and then if you see it under microscope, you will find the typical clue cells that are present, where you find that the vaginal squames are surrounded by multiple macrophages. And that is what is a typical clue cell. Any of the 3 criteria out of these 4 criteria are present, it will be telling you that is BV. Now, clue cells are vaginal epithelial cells that have bacteria adherent to the surfaces, and the edges of the squamous epithelial cells, which normally have a sharply defined cell border, become studded with bacteria, and these are the typical clue cells. And the epithelial cells appear to be peppered with the cocobacilli. If the pH is found to be greater than 4.5, it indicates infection, and the pH may be elevated in up to 90% of patients with bacterial vaginosis, and this is something that we have to bear in mind. Other diagnostic tools are the vaginal gram staining, and where you can do the Nugent or the Spiegel's criteria. Culture, where you look at the colony count and measure them, and if you find that there are more than 7, then they're significant for a particular microbiome. DNA probes and newer diagnostic modalities include the PIP activity and the Siladase test. Now, Nugent score is something that we can request our pathologists, especially aligned to our fertility clinics, wherein we do the quantification and grading of the bacteria via gram stain of the vaginal samples. And 3 types of bacteria via gram stain, the Lactobacillus, the Bacteroides, Gardnerella, and Mobilingus are seen, each graded on a scale of 1 to 4. And in this system, the Lactobacillus and the Bacteroides, Gardnerella are given scores between 0 to 4, but Mobilingus is only graded from 0 to 2. So total scores are then calculated and used as follows. 0 to 3 is normal, 4 to 6 intermediate, and 7 to 10 is taken as bacterial vaginosis. And that is how you can quantify the score, and that can help you in quantifying also your treatment approaches. So you can see here in this picture, this is the normal vaginal microbiome structure, where the Nugent score is 0, while you can see here abnormal, because you can see the polymicrobial preparations, there are a lot of clue cells, cocobacilli, gram variable, and lactobacilli, which are few or absolutely absent, while in a normal vaginal picture, you can see that the lactobacilli are present there. And that's how the scoring is done, and this is how the report you can get from your pathology labs. Now, the differentiation is something that we all must know, and we have been practicing for all these years, and I would not go into the details of this. What we have to remember, however, is whenever the pH is found to be less, then it's usually candidiasis. pH more than 4.5 is usually trichomoniasis or differential bacterial vaginosis, and trichomoniasis will be very typical, and usually we do not miss that diagnosis. Spontaneous preterm births, late miscarriages, postpartum endometriosis are the obstetric adverse events, and we know that the normal flora during pregnancy changes because the numbers of microbial flora increase as pregnancy progresses. Lactobacilli increase tenfold, anaerobes decrease, aerobes are constant, and it's more benign, no threat to the fetus. But etiology of preterm births is found to be multifactorial, and 40% of the time is attributed to infections. And earlier the BV is detected, greater the risk of PTB. And even if no spontaneous reversion of flora, there is no change. And therefore, I feel it's a good practice that whenever we are embarking on a fertility cycle, when the woman conceives at around 12 weeks of a pregnancy, while we're screening her for so many other things, it's a good practice also to screen her for bacterial vaginosis. Now, there are various reasons why preterm births can be associated, and it's extremely hurting to see women having early onset PROMs after their infertility cycles. You do ICSI, you do IVF, and they land up with an incompetent cervix, and we think that it's an incompetent cervix, but it actually can be inflammatory cytokines coming from vaginosis or vaginal alterations, which are causing inflammatory breakdown of the cervix and finally landing them in bulging membranes or sometimes rupture of membranes usually. Now, it's also known to affect the placenta, and there have been evidences of certain cytokine actions in the placental tissue, which have been studied in a few studies. Bacterial vaginosis is also supposed to be linked to cerebral palsy in some patients, and this can be because of the development and growth of oligodendrocytes, which is impaired by interleukin-6 and TNF-alpha, and this also has to be looked into because that can be responsible for periventricular leukomalacia and subsequent cerebral palsy. So 15 to 20% of all pregnant women 4 times are more likely to have preterm births. Earlier in pregnancy, bacterial vaginosis is higher the risk of preterm delivery, and therefore we should screen for them. And that has to be a part like how we screen women for asymptomatic bacillus around 16 weeks. I think we should screen for BV at around 12 weeks. Look at the pattern of the flora. You can even do a simple litmus test and maybe identify it. And it's been found that if treated appropriately, there is definitely a reduction in preterm births to the tune of 37 to 50%, and which is definitely very, very, we require to pay attention to this. The evidence of abnormal flora with preterm birth is strong, but no definite causal relationship exists. Other obstetric problems like late miscarriages, postpartum endometritis, higher in cesarean sections, and late trimester screening, therefore, also is important. So the screen times can be 12 weeks, and the other screen time can be between 24 to 28 weeks, and that can be also your treatment time to prevent all these complications. Now, in gynecology, CIN, PID, and infertility and first trimester loss, and that is the main core of my talk today, that we have to also look at the patients who are undergoing IVF. Tubal disease has been identified to be responsible or caused by BV, or maybe BV makes these women more susceptible to chlamydial infections, giving rise to tubal abnormalities, and it has also been found to be responsible for adverse effects on sperms. Post-hysterectomy vaginal cuff infections, post-abortal sepsis, and urethral syndrome are attributed. Now let's look at a few components of the vaginal microbiota. I have been, as an endoscopic surgeon, at the receiving end of having to drain many ovarian abscesses which have occurred post-oocyte retrieval. Now that means there's something going wrong. Contamination is possible from vaginal cervical microorganisms by needle puncture of the vagina, and microorganisms that enter the endometrium from the cervix during the embryo transfer could damage the developing embryo and prevent pregnancy, and this has to be borne in mind. Now, if we look at the pathophysiology of the vaginal imbalance in female infertility, increases the concentration of interleukin-1 beta in the vaginal environment, triggers the generation of reactive oxygen species, affects the membrane integrity and flexibility, and impairs both the tail motion and the sperm-oocyte fusion, and disrupts the fertilization and implantation of the postulated pathophysiological mechanisms. So therefore, naturally, the question comes, probiotics, can they help us? These, especially the ones containing lactobacilli, used over a long period, an alternative to antibiotics, particularly within the context of high infection recurrence rates, probably would help us. Now, according to the WHO, probiotics are defined as live microorganisms which, when administered in adequate amounts, confer a health benefit to the host. So these are typically the characteristics are acid and bile stability. They have to be of human origin, production of antimicrobial substances adhered to the human intestinal cells, persistent in the human intestinal tract, clinically validated and documented health effects, antagonism against enteric pathogens, susceptible to antibiotics, and safety in food and clinical use, because we all know that most of the vaginal contamination occurs from the GI tract and the intestinal flora. And what are prebiotics? Prebiotics are compounds in food, especially the ones which we talk of, the curds, the yogurts, that induce the growth of activity of the beneficial microorganisms. And prebiotics plus probiotics is equal to symbiotics. So they are known to stimulate the growth of will be telling you that most of them, nearly 60 to 70% of them, are suffering from some sort of, gastrocolitis. Many times they have dyspepsia. Many times they are not able to take food, and probably they actually do not have any mechanisms in which they are producing those friendly bacteria inside them. Additionally, they also suffer from nutritional deficiency because there are no absorption mechanisms in place, and this has to be also thought of. The vaginal microbiome as predictor for in vitro fertilization with or without ICSI outcome was a prospective study published in the Human Reproduction Update by Cordner et al. In 2019. And he has raised questions as is the presence of absence of certain bacteria associated with failure to become pregnant after an IVF or IVF-ICSI treatment. Can the composition of vaginal microbiome be used as an independent predictor for IVF or ICSI outcomes? Our results indicate that vaginal microbiome profiling using the IS-PRO technique enables stratification of the chance of becoming pregnant prior to the start of an IVF-ICSI treatment, and knowledge of their vaginal microbiota may enable the couples to make a more balanced decision regarding timing and continuation of their treatments, is what this particular publication has to say. Now, there has also been mention about the differential composition of vaginal microbe, but not of seminal microbiome, which is associated with successful intrauterine insemination in couples with idiopathic infertility. So it was found that they studied the vaginal and the seminal microbiomes, and they have found to find the involvement of their association with reproductive outcomes. And this study concluded that the potential role of Bacteroides is promoting a favorable environment for pregnancy, and suggests that microbiome characterization could be useful together with standard clinical and laboratory assessments in the pre-IUI evaluation and the infertile couples. Now, abnormal vaginal microbiota may be associated with poor reproductive outcomes, and this is a prospective study in IVF patients where wider implications of the findings were abnormal vaginal microbiota may negatively affect the clinical pregnancy rate in IVF patients, and if a negative correlation between abnormal vaginal microbiota and the clinical pregnancy rate is corroborated, patients could be screened and subsequently treated for abnormal vaginal microbiota prior to the fertility treatments. Now, relevance of assessing the uterine microbiota in the infertility at the outset, if you remember, I mentioned that this was the finding that there is some sort of a dysbiosis in the endometrial secretion, where there is absence of lactobacillus dependent microbiota, and they have been known to be associated with IVF failures. And there has been a meta-analysis which demonstrated that bacterial vaginosis is significantly more prevalent in women with infertility, and women with tubal factor had significantly higher prevalence of BV, and 40% of patients undergoing ART have bacterial vaginosis, and that is quite a large number. So the normal flora of the reproductive tract includes a variety of lactobacillus species which promote a healthy, supportive environment for the embryo in the pre and the periconceptual period, and lactobacilli provide a safe environment for implantation, and these comprise 90 to 95% of the total bacterial count in the reproductive tract, with 4 species showing numerical dominance: the Crispatus, the Innes, the Jensenii, and the Gasseri, and 2 main attributes of lactobacilli have been shown to play an important role in implantation. So the subclinical alteration of the cervical vaginal microbiome in women with idiopathic infertility has been studied by this group mentioned here, and the quantitative assessment and identification of specific microorganisms of the cervical vaginal microflora could increase the accuracy of available tools for the diagnosis of infertility and improve the adoption of the therapeutic protocols. Now, the receptivity cohort study protocol to validate the urogenital microbiome as predictor for IVF or IVF-ICSI outcome has been studied, and the predictive knowledge of the microbiome profile may enable couples to make a substantiated decision on whether to continue this cycle, has also been included in this particular publication. Again, the same publication from the Codedu group that I mentioned. So the vaginal microbiome as is a tool to predict IVF success, and the local microbiota, especially the absence of presence of specific microbes within the parts of the female reproductive tract, seem to be associated with the outcome of ART. So, effect of the vaginal microbiome on the pregnancy rate in women receiving assisted reproductive treatment was studied by Andrew Bernabul et al. And group, and they concluded that the vaginal microbiome can influence the results of ART, and the profiles dominated by lactobacillus were associated with achievement of pregnancy, and there was a relationship in positive outcomes. So evidence that the endometrial microbiota has an effect on implantation success failure has been proved, and this has been also published in the AJOG journal that I mentioned. So how do you treat the conditions? And it's been found in various studies that treatment of BV improves ART success rates. Now, when we talk of the treatment of bacterial vaginosis, what we have in our hands is, since it's an anaerobic infection, it's always a good practice to combine it with azithromycin, secnidazole, which is easy to give to them, and fluconazole, which is an antifungal. So it will take care of an entire mixed vaginitis kind of a profile. And onwards, you can continue giving them probiotics, maybe for a period of a fortnight or a month, and that can help us in improvising their lactobacillus force inside the vagina and improving the flora. Thank you so much for a patient hearing.
Thank you so much, ma'am. This is Dr. Kiran. I think, ma'am, you made it very nice in covering all the aspects of vaginal microbiome, and the slides were very, very clear, lots of clarity and information. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Yes. I've kept some more slides for treatment as answers if anybody asks me questions.
Surely, ma'am. So with this, I would like to open up the forum for doctors for discussion. You can type in the questions as well as ask ma'am, unmuting your mic. Ma'am, there's one question. The doctor's name is not visible. I'll just read that question to you, ma'am.
Yeah.
They want to know your opinion on hospital-acquired infections like Pseudomonas found in the uterus.
Opinion in what sense?
The question probably, ma'am, meant what about a hospital-acquired infection like Pseudomonas?
See, if the Pseudomonas has to enter the uterine cavity in an hospital-bound infection, it would be through either a procedure that we have performed. Maybe it can be a simple thing like even while doing a vaginal delivery, unfortunately, there is a terrible practice of entering the uterine cavity while delivering the placenta, which many a times is unnecessary. And typical aseptic precautions which are universal have to be followed. Hand washing, using aseptic precautions, toileting the vagina before getting into, if at all you need to manipulate the uterus from inside, because Pseudomonas would come there only through this. The other mechanism would be while you're doing a DNE procedure, or whether you're doing a DNC, or maybe a hysteroscopic procedure. Now, whenever we are doing these procedures, aseptic precautions is one thing, instrumental handling is one thing, but unfortunately, I have been at the receiving end of such infections in my, because we are a tertiary care center, we find that a lot of, sort of pitfalls are there in this particular process of asepsis. Be it a simple miscarriage, be it a simple DNE, be it a simple placental delivery, even at the time of doing a cesarean section, it is not at all a good practice to go inside and, mop that decidua or the uterine cavity with a sponge. Placenta is a deciduous organ. It is going to be delivered. So one has to be very careful, and then we can definitely reduce these infections. So these are all the mechanisms of infertility control practices of your facility which are responsible for this kind of infections.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, the next question is from Dr. Milind Kulwalkar.
Yes.
Should vaginal washes be encouraged?
No. Vaginal washes should not be encouraged because they disturb the pH. You can just ask them to keep a proper perineal and a vulval hygiene. And that can be achieved by just, sort of cleaning themselves by clear water. Sometimes some women have a very chronic infection where there's sort of a film which is, adherent on their vulva. In such a situation, you may consider using some pH balanced detergents which will help in removing that stickiness. But this should not be a part of a regular practice. And especially women would be using anything from Dettol soaps to maybe soframycin, or sometimes they would use Savlon and Dettol and all this, because they are going to disturb your natural protective mechanisms. What is very important is the hygiene of the underwear is very important. Hygiene of the anal orifice is very important. Many women have to be taught about their perineal hygiene. We belong to the tropical country, and in the tropical country, the perineal hygiene has to be maintained. Wearing very tight clothes around your perineum, tight denims, they are not going to be of any use, and especially the hygienes while we are using public toilets and all this. Unfortunately, we have to, make it a part of our adult education program, especially, and gynecologists seem to be requiring to take this onus and responsibility.
Thank you, ma'am. I think the importance of counseling can never be overemphasized, ma'am. I think the very, very important aspect you covered.
The patient should be educating her about all these important things.
Definitely. Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, the next question is from Dr. Suman Sinha. She wants to know, can it be given in pregnancy, for how long, and the dose?
What can be given in pregnancy?
It's not mentioned, ma'am. Maybe.
Okay, Sumantra madam is a very dear friend. Madam, I'll just share with you one thing. What we can follow as a practice is peri-menstrual. When a woman is embarking on a fertility kind of a planning, it's better to give her a peri-menstrual combination that I mentioned about the secnidazole, the azithromycin, and the fluconazole combination. Put her on probiotics if she's symptomatic. Second thing is, I use the same combination at between 12 to 16 weeks during pregnancy, and again at around 24 to 28 weeks, because not all patients would have an access to BV or a Newborn score. While the patients who have, I do offer them. Additionally, especially when you're having patients who are having all these risk factors, at around 16 weeks, it's always a good practice, again, to put in a speculum, do a transvaginal sonography for a cervical length assessment, and then take a call whether she requires a progesterone therapy or a cervical encerclage to prevent a PROM. So these are simple protocols which we can follow. And of course, if the woman is symptomatic and is having recurrent vaginitis, I offer her local, insertion of clindamycin and clotrimazole combination pessaries, and sometimes in especially the ART-ICSI patients, we keep them maybe weekly or maybe weekend or fortnightly kind of a protocol along with probiotics, because we have to prevent PROMs come what may, and there has to be a strict protocol. And patients, as I told you, 50% of them are asymptomatic. I hope it answers your question, madam.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, I had one question in continuation, since you mentioned antibiotics. During my pharmacology days, I did a study in South India, ma'am, and we found a lot of emerging azithromycin resistance. So is it common even now, ma'am? Are patients, are you seeing like increased resistance to this azithromycin antibiotic?
I have no experience of seeing this, but this protocol which I have devised has come as a one is a personal experience and wisdom derived from some stalwarts like Professor Pratap Kumar from Manipal. He gives azithromycin for BV prophylaxis after diagnosis, while I give it as a prophylaxis because I'm really scared of PROMs. And unfortunately, we cannot control the ones who are coming from the community, but I'm extremely proud to say that within my practice, I've been able to reduce the incidence of PROM considerably, maybe because of these very strict practices about vaginitis.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, the next question is your opinion on the treatment for recurrent candidiasis.
Yeah, recurrent candidal infection, one is we can give them antifungals. If not locally, the clotrimazole, nystatin, clindamycin combination can be one combo which we can use locally, and give it in a proper dose. Ensure that the woman knows how to insert it properly, to educate you, to teach them maybe through cards or you may some diagrams. If not, no relief has been found in a period of 6 days, then continue the dosages for maybe a fortnight period, add a probiotic, and you can also give them oral antifungals in the form of fluconazole, which can be a single dose or maybe given every 48 hours, 3 dosages. Or you can even give them itraconazole, which can be given over a period of 3 days, or sometimes if it's too bad, then over a period of 14 weeks.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, there's a request from Dr. Santosh Kirloskar. He wants to see the medication slide, ma'am, the antibiotics probably.
Okay, so antibiotics, I'm going to this slide. Antibiotics, you can see my slide?
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely, ma'am.
So antibiotics are the mainstay of therapy for BV, local application or oral administration of metronidazole. What I spoke actually,
Right.
or clindamycin are preferred and recommended for the treatment of BV. Relapse versus recurrence and biofilm, there is a group of microorganisms in which cells stick to each other and often also to a surface, and therefore they make it very, very impenetrable. Now the CDC recommended treatments for BV are oral metronidazole, 500 milligram twice daily for 7 days, 0.75% metronidazole gel, 1 application intravaginally every night for 5 nights, 2% clindamycin vaginal cream, 1 applicator intravaginally every night for 7 nights. Now we usually have a clindamycin pessary available in our country, which is usually combined with a clotrimazole. Alternate treatments could be oral tinidazole 2 grams per day for 2 days, tinidazole orally 1 gram per day for 5 days, clindamycin 300 milligram twice daily for 7 days, and clindamycin 100 milligram ovules intravaginally each night for 3 nights. So this is the typical thing. I think everybody can take a screenshot of this slide and keep it ready So it can help us in taking care of the recurrent vulvovaginitis. Now, metronidazole is inexpensive. Allergy is rare, lactobacilli is sparing, and it can be given orally as well as in the form of a gel. Clindamycin is a little expensive, causes pseudomembranous colitis if given orally, and there is a delayed return of lactobacillus, and therefore it can be given locally in the form of a pessary or in the form of a gel. Tinidazole is a second generation nitro-imidazole that is considered an alternative regimen, longer half-life than metronidazole and fewer side effects. 1 gram orally once daily for 5 days as efficacy slightly higher and side effects are slightly less frequent. That will shorter course therapy, and randomized trials have shown that it is least as effective as metronidazole, but not superior, and a single dose regimen appears to be as effective as vaginal clindamycin cream. I am extremely personally fond of secnidazole, which is a nitramidazole antibiotic with a longer half-life than metronidazole. And in an RCT of a non-infiltrated trial, a single 2-gram oral dose of secnidazole was at least as effective as a 7-day course of 500 metro and was well tolerated. And in a phase 3 trial, comparing a single 2-gram dose of oral secnidazole with placebo, single dose secnidazole was superior to placebo with clinical outcome responder rates of 53 versus 19%. And a single 1-gram oral dose of secnidazole appears to be effective as well. Although compliance is enhanced by the convenience of single dose regimen, there is no evidence demonstrating that single dose is superior to multi-dose metronidazole therapy, unfortunately, and which previously available in other countries. Secnidazole was approved for the treatment of BV by US FDA. So we might as well use it, and I'm using it very commonly, rampantly, not today, but for the past 14 years in my obstetrics and infertility practice. And of course, the adjuvant therapy in the form of lactobacillus restoration, capsules, and various kinds of discouraging soaps, antiseptics, and douches have to be followed. Yes, I hope that's enough.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much once again for the clarification, ma'am.
This is the slide which is showing the use of oral probiotics. And this particular study has shown that oral probiotics lengthen the remission in patients with recurrent BV and AV and improve the clinical and microbiological parameters. So therefore, when you are treating it, it's always a good practice also to give them probiotics, because that's going to help us enhance this treatment, and it's going to be of importance. Okay, anything more I can tell you?
Surely, ma'am.
No, that's it. I am waiting for the questions.
Okay, fine, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, the next question is from Dr. Manish Lad. So since you spoke about lactobacillus at great length, she wants to know, can we start lactobacillus empirically in all young patients who are just married?
I think, is that Dr. Manisha Laddad who is talking?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. See, in a young, Manisha, I would suggest that, go through their dietary history. Find out whether, because most of these young girls either are eating a lot of junk food or they are not eating healthy diet and they want to become thin, and many of them are smoking. So most of them suffer from some sort of a gastrocolitis, and that is going to kill their intestinal flora as it is. So first of all, we must look at that. Treat if they have a chronic amoebiasis, gastritis, gastrocolitis, give them probiotics in that situation, change their eating habits, and a lot of things, a lot of solutions will be taken from there itself. And also, it has to be a practice wherever, especially the young, pregnant, postpartum, infertile people, give them anti-helminthics. They are extremely prevalent. 58% of the adult population has helminthic infestations. So that has to be treated. And then, of course, you can take it. Many a times I have found, even in older women, giving them probiotic supplements for a longer period of time has helped them in restoration, their natural flora, both in the intestine as well as in the vagina.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, the next question is, can we recommend V-wash?
I spoke to you about the V-wash again.
Yes.
No vaginal douching.
Absolutely.
Please keep the vulva and the perineum clean. The hygiene has to be from that part. Nothing has to be going inside. Like your ear canal, like your nose, like your intestine, mouth. God has taken care of everything if you maintain proper hygiene and good food practices and immunity. Don't disturb what God has given you.
Right, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am.
And please, you should always talk about sexual hygiene. The women have to teach their male partners, or the doctor can take a responsibility of speaking them about sexual hygiene. Very, very important.
Absolutely, ma'am. Absolutely. Ma'am, the next question is from Dr. Revati Janakiram. She wants to know your opinion on microbiome in follicular fluid and fertility outcome, and the ET catheter tip flora, ma'am.
Yes, I just mentioned about those 2 publications right now, if you must have seen, that there was a finding, especially in the ACOG publication that I mentioned, that when they studied that endometrial fluid and the follicular fluid, they found that there was an alteration. In the follicular fluid, they found cytokines, which are where association of BV inside the vagina, and the endometrium had bacteria which were non-lactobacillus dependent. And in these, the adverse outcome, there were no, fertility failures were a little more.
Right. Ma'am, the next question is, what is the role of doxycycline in vaginal infections?
Doxycycline has been proposed to be a treatment for chlamydial infections. And as we must talk about chlamydia, these are typical, these are sidey kind of infections of the vagina, because they are absolutely asymptomatic. They get inside the GI tract, the upper GI tract, very easily. And they are the ones which cause tubal infertility. If not tubal infertility, they alter the mucosa and the motility of the tube. And they are responsible for ectopic pregnancies and typical PIDs. So while they're entering through your vagina, there'll be no symptoms, but they would have caused a lot of devastation inside. And therefore, it has been found that chlamydia, doxycycline happens to be a treatment. Even azithromycin can be used for chlamydia treatment. But as I mentioned just now, Kiran, BV is something that we also have to focus about, because the moment you have an alteration of the pH of the vagina and the change in the friendly bacteria, the woman is going to be susceptible to all these kind of infections. So therefore, that's important.
Totally agreed, ma'am. Totally agreed. Ma'am, the next question is from Dr. Milind, ma'am. He wants to know, what is your experience on Evonew vaginal pessary?
Yeah. Now, Evonew vaginal pessary is something that I found it extremely useful, especially, and it's given during the menstrual, atypical timelines from the 7th to the 14th day of the menstrual cycle. And that is the time when most of these alterations occur, and that's the time when the probiotic enhancement is essential. Many of the patients have accepted it, but the ones who haven't accepted it, because it has to be placed inside the vagina, have found it extremely costly. They have found it a little expensive. But I think they have a good place, especially in the recurrent vaginitis, or where you want a very swift replenishment of the bacterial flora, of the vaginal flora. And it's a good practice to give it for 3 menstrual cycles. It's a local application. It's not to be taken orally.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, your comments on having a syndromic approach for managing STDs.
Yeah, that's what I spoke.
Absolutely, ma'am.
Yes, you give the same thing, this syndromic approach of STD, maybe therein you will give it for a longer period of time, perimenstrually and all that, depending on the patient cycle. But that kind of a syndromic approach I also propose in prevention of cramps, wherein you give an anaerobe, you give an azithromycin as an anti-chlamydial, you give an antifungal, and you give a probiotic.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, I had one question just for curiosity, ma'am, if I can ask. Ma'am, you spoke about at length about this Nugent score. What is the practicality of getting this going ahead in the future, ma'am? Can every patient undergo this? Do you foresee that?
The Nugent score is not a big, it's not a rocket science. It's a simple score wherein you just have to be speaking to your pathologist, and your pathologist has to be ready to do the colony count and put it in the typical report format. Having said that, it is a challenge to get it, because I know that even in my university or hospital, I find it difficult. Even in my corporate practice, I find it, I have to speak to those specific labs, please make it available. And then, because it is not something which is run by the machine. It is something where the pathologist has to visualize. But then a simpler option for that would be doing a good per speculum examination and doing a pH You can just do the pH by a litmus paper. There are wonderful pH litmus papers now available in the Indian market also. And that tells you 4.5 kam hai ya zyada hai. And then you know clinical features are there to tell you.
Right. Absolutely, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, Dr. Revati and Dr. Santosh and Dr. Swati, thank you. Dr. Swati Naik says, ma'am, wonderful talk as always. Ma'am, she wants to know how about prophylactic probiotics along with all ET transfers. Is it needed?
I don't know, because I feel if the woman has vaginitis, why not? Why not? But then there have to be studies. And maybe madam is also very well read than me, so she must be knowing if there are any such publications. Because if you can see now, what I have put on the slide currently is a treatment approach which says that whenever you are using antibiotics, also give probiotics along with. So I think that would be a good practice actually.
Thank you, ma'am. Any more questions to ma'am, doctors?
There is one more thing, Kiran. There is a lot of going about, these biofilms,
Yes, ma'am, absolutely.
These are something which are responsible for, if you don't treat that vaginitis, it keeps on becoming there, sitting there again. Antibiotics, again, many times around, ET transfers and all that, people tend to give antibiotics. Many times they are quite irrational. And then you have this buildup of vaginal biofilms and they can make it extremely impenetrable, the treatment. So therefore, we as doctors have to be extremely aware. Whenever the patient says, ki maine kuch to dawai li, kuch to treatment, always ask for the details. Because sometimes she must have taken a whole lot of treatments which may give rise to, and therefore these impenetrable biofilms are sometimes extremely difficult to treat. And that is the place where probably, we can help in using probiotics to disrupt these biofilms and restore the normal flora. Now, somebody was talking about the vaginal cleaning. You as a doctor maybe sometimes can use, this is something which we used to practice in our residency days and which I sometimes take recourse to in some such resistant patients, is give them a wash with soda bicarb. And then put her on a vaginal treatment and an oral treatment, as we mentioned, and a probiotic. Sometimes they can have some relief.
Definitely, ma'am.
And if we are just ending this session, I want to share with our audience, this is the Bacterial Vaginosis checklist, which was put forth by the Foxy BV, treatment for screen positive, symptomatic pregnant or non-pregnant, symptomatic with high risk, preferable to be treated before 20 weeks, and women undergoing some surgical procedure. And they talk of metronidazole, intravaginal gel, clindamycin cream, and probiotics here. So this is based on the BASH study of 2012, and this is something that we can take home from here on behalf of the Foxy. So, any more questions?
Ma'am, I think it was a wonderful, wonderful session, ma'am. Thank you. I would request Kumar sir to give the vote of thanks.
Dr. Girjawag ma'am, wonderful listening to you as always. Quite a few of the audience have appreciated the presentation and thanked you. And I would like to mention Professor Vidya Tobi was the first doctor to welcome everyone for this special session today evening.
Yes, she is the chairman of the committee.
Yes, and so while she welcomed with her permission and your permission, may I thank you, your time, and the esteemed audience for their time too, and for this wonderful presentation.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thanks.
I'm looking forward to working with all of you more, ma'am.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you once again.